Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Randy Harris, pastor at Crossview Community Church. Over the last few weeks, I've been talking to you about a new business in Fayette, owned and operated by my good friend Randall Aldridge. The shop is now open. We're located at 299 22nd Avenue Northwest, just behind Advanced Auto Parts here in Fayette. The shop is your one-stop body shop. We handle all of your auto body repair needs. We offer free pickup and delivery, handle all the insurance claims. Even if your car isn't drivable, we can arrange to have it picked up. So call Mandy at 932-9222. The shop, your one-stop body shop, is now open. Americans are absolutely fascinated with reality TV. 30 years ago, we scarcely even knew what that was. Probably new ground was broken however many years ago it was, about 30, 35 years ago, when candid camera came on the scene. Everybody remembers candid camera, a hidden camera showing folks doing things, having jokes played on them, unaware of the fact that they were being videotaped. However, in the last 10 years or so, the new phase in America is reality shows where people know the camera is on them, and it's just interaction between people. MTV broke ground several years ago with a show called The Real World. And basically, the premise of this show is this: throw together about 8 20-somethings who have raging hormones, put them in one location, and put cameras on them and see what happens. And what you'll find if you watch that show is a crash course in Generation X mentality. You'll find out exactly what Generation X, for the most part, thinks about things like promiscuity, homosexuality, work and labor, and all those different kinds of things, the real world. I got news for you. If that really is the real world, the next generation coming up to lead our country, we are in some kind of trouble. Then came shows like Cops, Survivor, CBS's cash cow, Court TV, Big Brother, and my personal favorite, Real TV. Real TV, that's by far my favorite because it's video clips of idiots. Running from police, getting hit by another car, skateboarders and skaters jumping up on side rails and going down and busting their head open. I get a kick out of it just because they're so idiotic. But it's called Real TV. It's not drama, not dramatized. And see, what happens is so much of our lives are dramatized on television, dating all the way back to the initiation of soap operas. So much is dramatized that we tend to lose touch with what's real. And so reality shows came along and just have taken America by storm. How often do you suppose it is that we Christians are accused of not living in the real world? Let me give you some examples. We come together a few times a week and we talk about spiritual things, and we try to live like Jesus did. We try to follow a man who lived a couple of thousand years ago, whom we've never met, whom much of the world rejects as, if they accept him as being historical, they don't accept him as being the Son of God. And yet we come together week after week and we say things like this: love God with everything you are and love your neighbor as yourself. We teach things like forgive those who have hurt you, whether they ask for forgiveness or not. We teach things like turn the other cheek if you get slapped. We teach things like help those who can't help themselves. Give your time and your talents and your resources to a church. And this is my personal favorite, and one we teach often. Everyone is welcome here, no matter where you have been or what you have done. We don't care about your past, but what, Crossview? We just care about where Jesus will take your future, right? We don't care where you've been, so everybody is welcome here. That's my personal favorite. Why do we teach those things? Because we believe that Jesus did. We believe Jesus taught it and lived it. And so we, his disciples, do the same thing. And yet, did you know that most people in the world, and even some people in churches, would say, though, Randy, that's not the real world. The things you're talking about sound good, and maybe they're good goals to have, but that's not the real world. We live in the real world. You've got to scratch and claw and fight to make your way in the world. You've got to do to others before they do to you, not as you would have them do to you. I'm not going to forgive somebody unless they ask for it. And even then, it depends on what they've done. Forgive somebody without them asking for forgiveness? That's not the real world. Turn the other cheek. This cracks me up. I'm sure you teachers probably hear this on the playground. I know Kelly tells me when she comes home, because she teaches PE, what the kids say. You know what it is? If somebody hits me, I'm going to hit them back harder. Not turn the other cheek. Somebody hits me, my daddy said I could pop them right back. She hears it every day. This one really gets me. The other day, I was talking with an older Christian woman, a neighbor of mine, in fact. And I said to her, so are your children coming in for Christmas? Oh, yes, they're coming, but they're not here yet. Well, do they have problems? What happened? No, they just have a bunch of stuff going on at their church. They always have stuff going on at that church. Now understand, Pastor, I'm for church, but, enough is enough. That's the real world, people would say. Many people cannot reconcile the differences between God's way, turn the other cheek, and what we understand as living in the real world. Well, I want to suggest to you this morning that some of the same faulty thinking, some of the same fallacies exist in churches. What people would call, this is real church. Now, we know what the New Testament says, and we really know what God wants, but that's not the way it really is. This is real church. Do you know what real church is like? Not the church described in the New Testament. Make sure you hear me. When I'm using this term today, this analogy I'm using, I'm not talking about the authentic, real deal church that Jesus built. I'm talking about just like we live in the real world. This is what you'll find in most churches. This is the real church. The 90-10 rule. You know what the 90-10 rule is? 10% of the people do 90% of the work. 10% of the people give 90% of the money. If you have 100 people in your church, 10 will do most of the work. If you have 1,000, 100 will. That's the 90-10 rule. If you've got a budget of X amount of dollars, you can almost bank on, you can go a little bit this way, a little bit that way, but it's going to be about 10% of the people give 90% of that amount. In the real church today, tithe, you hear people say, well, I gave my tithe. I've been tithing. Listen, that word has come to mean just what you give. You can drop a quarter in and some people say, well, you tithe. No, that's not what tithe means. But in the real church, that's what it has come to mean. Tithe has come to mean what you give, not an attempt to give 10% of your gross income to God, which is what tithing really is. And that's what Moses called his people do. Surely we can go one up on Moses and maybe shoot for 11%, 10.5%, 10.0000001. That's the real church. In the real church, services are predictable and routine. Well, let's just sing a few songs, let's have a prayer, have some preaching, pass the basket, and then be done. I had a guy say to me one time, can't we get that done in an hour? As though he was taking his clothes to the dry cleaners instead of standing before God Almighty. Well, we ought to be able to get that done in an hour. You know, those jokes at the beginning were so funny is because they're so true. 2-minute warning. It's almost over. Gather it up. In the real church, everyone, for the most part, is the audience. I hear it every day on the radio, on WLDX. Come be a part of our audience. Come be a part of our audience. Guess what, guys? The audience is enthroned on high. We're the performers. We're the ones, whether it's me up here or John leading singing or you sitting there singing or raising your hands or saying your silent prayers or breaking your bread or whatever it is you're doing, you're giving it to Him. You're not the audience, He is. And yet in the real church, most people come, sit, listen, receive, get up, and leave. Audience, worship. That's the real church. I don't know about you, but if that's the real church and the way in the culture in which we live today, then what I want is an unreal church. Amen. Now, what I mean by that is not unreal in the sense of inauthentic, not unreal in the sense of not true to God. I'm talking about this kind of unreal. Man, that's the way you guys are? That's unreal. That's unbelievable. Wow. 106 people here today. That's unreal. Amen. Oh, excuse me, 117. 117 people here today. In a facility that normally seats 98 in purple chairs. That's unreal. Not inaccurate, not false, unbelievable, unimaginable. That's the kind of church I want. I don't want to play status quo church anymore. Do you? Do you want to go and you know, check off the list? I go and I sat and I listened and I went and I feel better. I've been to church today. Listen, you don't go to church, you are church. You're Christ's body giving all that you can to God. That's what the unreal church is. That kind of church is the kind of church that's found in the text. So what happened? If today is the real world and that's the way real church is, and yet we're shooting for what the text really says and what I'm calling the unreal church. What happened? Let me tell you one thing that happened. Hundreds of years of organized religion and man's rules have layered tons of minutia and junk on top of what the unreal church is supposed to be, the authentic church is supposed to be. That's what's happened. Many churches in this country, and around the world for that matter, are on life support or they're already dead and they don't even know it. They just go and they sit and they're there, and the people that eventually grow older and die off, the doors are closing all over the country. There's no vibrancy. There's no sense of life. There's certainly no reaching out. It's just we hold on to status quo. This is the way church is, and people are just dying on the vine, looking around going, I didn't know it could be any different. How many of us have said that 100 times in 2.5, almost 3 years? I didn't know it could be any better. I didn't know it could get any better. And it gets better week after week after week. And that's what happens in the unreal church when Jesus runs it. Amen. And not man's traditions and what man wants to do and say. This time of year we begin to talk about resolutions, New Year's resolutions and commitments and starting over. And so I want to take a few minutes here to challenge my Crossview family, and really this is applicable to anybody, whether you're traveling through, going back home, or this is not your church family. This is what it's all about, what I'm going to be talking about this morning. We're approaching, as I just said, our 3rd year together as Crossview. Did you know God has more than doubled us in the 2 years we've been together? That's His doing. Randall said it earlier, ask and you shall receive. That's what we've asked for. We've asked for God to send His people, and God is sending His people, and we're busting at the seams. We're growing. God has worked powerfully in us, and He's worked powerfully through us, and He's going to continue to do that as long as we continue to submit to His will and resolving to know nothing but Jesus Christ and Him crucified. Then things are going to continue to go well. But for our part in what we do, we've got to constantly be evaluating where we are. I talk to my dream teamers all the time about this. We've got to constantly redream, dream again. Well, what could we become? What could we do? No sacred cows here. We try something, if it doesn't work, it's out the window. Amen. It's not just, well, we've done it for 2 weeks now. We got to keep on doing it. No, if it doesn't work, if it's broke, we throw it out. We try something else. But that's what we have to do. We have to continue to dream, continue to plan, and more than that, we have to continue to check ourselves against this real church myth. Well, this is just the way church is. This is the way it's always been. This is what we've come to expect. We have to check ourselves against that, because when we begin to move into a rut and fall into a rut, then all the ideas and dreams that we have just get the old wet blanket treatment, and we're not going to do that. So, here's what we're going to talk about today. 3 things, and then we're done, and the lesson is yours. We want to be the unreal church. We want to be the authentic, true church. Not that there's one with one right name, not that kind of church. I'm talking about the ones that are Jesus-centered, Jesus-focused, but they are characterized by some things. And this is the first one. In the unreal church, the 90-10 rule is smashed beyond recognition. That's what I want here. That's what I want here. You ought to want that too. 10% of the people do 90% of the work. 10% of the people give 90% of the time. That's the 90-10 rule. I want to smash that rule, and I got news for you. I think it's that way because of this. It's not because people are bad. It's not because people don't want to serve. It's not because people don't want to work. It's because, again, back to religion, religion has placed all the responsibility on a few people, and those few people get weary and tired. You have been taught your whole life, either directly or indirectly, in coming to church, that everybody else will pick up the slack. That's what you've been taught. Now, that's not your fault, but it becomes your responsibility once you learn different to put that into practice. To whom much has been given, much will be required. So now I'm putting the burden on you and the responsibility on you that now you know you've got to act upon it. The person who knows what he should do and doesn't do it is the person who sins, James says. So now you're going to know. The 90-10 rule has never been a part of the church in this book. In the unreal church, that 90-10 thing is out the window. No matter where you turn in the text, no matter where you turn in the text in the story of the church, you're going to find a couple of things. You're going to find teamwork, and you're going to find sharing. You're not going to find a few people. You're not going to find this hierarchy of, and this is not a direct allusion to Catholicism, but the way they have it set up, Pope and cardinals and bishops and that hierarchy of structure, where this person does that and this person, and if you don't have a part in that, then you're basically sunk. That's not the way it was in this text. You realize for 300 years, the church was met in living rooms and in temple courts and in mountain caves and any place else they could. Long before there were church buildings, long before there were ambos, before there were pulpits, people met in living rooms. That's why we've tried to recreate the living room church. Because everybody has something to share. Paul says it this way in Ephesians, from Jesus the whole body is joined and held together by every supporting ligament. And it grows and builds itself up in love, and this is the key part, as each part does its work. That's how it happens. No wonder so many bodies are failing and weak and dying, because you got one arm trying to hold the whole thing up. 2 or 3 or 4 people trying to do the whole thing. That's the 90-10 rule, and that's not going to work. It has never worked. It has never worked. A body is held together by lots of parts, some of them small, some of them large, but the key is all of them equally important. It means that you have something to contribute. You have some way in which you can serve, in which you can help. So let's go here. If you feel like you didn't help all that much this year, that's okay. Be done with that and start the new year and say, I'm going to help some way this year. It may be small. It may seem insignificant to other people, but there's something I'm going to do this year. Do you realize how much we have to get done? I'm talking about from things like carpentry and fixing up the building. We've got a roof that leaks, and we need monitor speakers. And the list goes on and on and on. There are things to do. And if you're sitting there thinking, well, that's what we pay you to do, then you better find somebody else, because that's not what you pay me to do. Amen. You pay me to equip you, to help me do those things. That's what you pay me to do. That's the way church has always worked. Forget about what it says about the real church today. Go back to what Jesus says. The real church, the unreal church, cannot operate on 90-10. It's not going to fly. It never. In the unreal church, God is the audience, and we're the participants, and everybody puts in. This goes with the first thing. Jesus' church was more like a living room church than the stodgy, starched shirt thing it has become in the last 2,000 years. 1,700 years, to be fair. The unreal church expanded and grew into the entire known world, and they met any place they could. It wasn't necessarily in a building, but if they had a building they could go into, they would go in there and do it till they got ran out. And then they'd go someplace else. Now, you realize Constantine built the first church buildings, and that was 300 AD. What'd they do from the time Jesus went back, about 30 to 300? What'd they do for 300 years? They met in living rooms. They met in homes. And when they came together, everybody had something to contribute. 1 Corinthians 14:26. When you come together, Paul says, everyone has a hymn or a word of instruction, a revelation, a tongue, an interpretation. All of these must be done for the strengthening of the church. Again, some of you are sitting here thinking, well, what do I have to offer? I can't preach like Randy or even better than Randy. I don't lead Bible studies. I can't sing like John. I don't feel comfortable getting up in front of other people. That's an excellent question, but what you have to understand is to contribute something doesn't necessarily mean publicly. In fact, most of the gifts and most of the things that need to be done are not public. They are behind the scenes. And a lot of times they're thankless jobs from other people. There are many, many, many things that each person here can contribute behind the scenes. Did you know every week, right back here before we start, a group of people gather to pray for what happens here today. They pray for you. They pray for me. They pray for what happens in this service, that somebody might be touched every week. Just praying privately back in a room. Did you know you can sit there right now and with your eyes open, listening and looking, you can say little sentence prayers in your mind for me. Do you know how significant that is? I mean, you're going before God and tapping into the power of the universe on my behalf. You can sit right there and say little sentence prayers for our church. Can you hand out a bulletin? Can you make coffee at home? If you can make coffee at home, you can make it here. Can you empty a trash can? Can you hand out bulletins? Can you greet somebody? Can you run a vacuum cleaner? Can you send a card of encouragement? Can you make a phone call of encouragement? I mean, there are so many things that you offer, and that's what strengthens the body. Not whether the preaching is good or bad, not whether the singing is good or bad, not whether the technology and all the things we embrace to help you find Jesus are all that good, but all the body chipping in. You are not the audience, you're the participant. So what are you going to participate with? What are you going to give? Small as you may think it is, it's important. It's important to God, and it's important to me. Listen, if you think that you're coming here to receive, you need to change your mind. You need to change your mind and say, I'm going to go there and I'm going to give. And in giving, then I'll get. If I go to give, you're going to receive more than you, pressed down, shaken together, overflowing 100-fold more. But if you go and just, I'm going to go and soak, I'm going to go and be fed, I'm going to go and get, you know what? You're really going to end up dry and bitter and angry that things don't go your way. I've grown up with it. I know it's true. But you come and you give and you think, I'm just going to give 100 and expect 0. You'll leave here so full, wanting more. Am I right? In the Unreal Church, we try to see people, there's things you can offer. In the Unreal Church, we try to see people for what they can become, not who they are now. Do you realize? You do realize, don't you, that that's not a popular concept in the real church of today. Most places that I've ever been and most churches that I've ever participated with or served with want people. Now, they may not come out and say it because they know it's not right, but ultimately what they want is people that look like them, act like them, dress like them, and more importantly, make about the same kind of money that they make. Now, I'm not trying to be ugly. That's just the way it is. You know, we need to go out and recruit some more blue-collar kind of people. What kind of a statement is that? You realize that is in direct contradiction to what the Unreal Church, what this true, authentic church was about, don't you? You realize that's opposite. We want to go out, that's like Jesus saying, you know, we want to go out and we want to recruit some disciples that have been through all the seminaries, all the Jewish seminaries, all the rabbinical schools of teaching. We want to go right to the Sanhedrin and get all the leaders. Amazingly enough, he picked fishermen. He picked a tax collector, complete outcast. He picked a zealot. He picked a guerrilla warfare fella. And even when he settled down and read what his mission was, here's what he said. The Spirit of the Lord is on me because he's anointed me to preach good news to the poor. He sent me to proclaim freedom for the prisoners and recovery of sight for the blind, to release the oppressed, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. You realize that is part of Jesus' mission statement. Poor, prisoners, blind, oppressed. In the Jewish mind of that day, those are all people who aren't even in God's favor, and you came to be with them? You got to be crazy. No wonder they wanted to stone him. No wonder after he read that in Luke 4, they took him out to a brow of a hill to kill him. I love the story that Rubel Shelley tells about the older gentleman, longtime member of his church, who was trying to put him on the spot and really trying to ridicule him and put him down. Said, Rubel, just exactly what's going to happen if our church pews start to fill up with drug addicts and whores and you know, prostitutes and homosexuals. And Rubel looked right at him and said, I guess we'll be the church that Jesus built. Here's the Crossview challenge. Here's what I'll challenge you with today. And I'm going to challenge you with it quite frequently. What we want at Crossview is to make the unreal real. We want to make what people consider abnormal normal. We want to take what people would just define as extraordinary and make that ordinary. And we want to take what's unbelievable and not only make it believable, but expected. And when we ought to come in here and be together, and the times even when we're apart, we ought to expect that God is going to do the unbelievable. That's what we've got to come to expect. And when we do that, then we have the unreal church. Then we have the real deal, authentic thing that Jesus built. I'm not going to settle for what the world calls a real church. I'm not going to settle for predictable and routine, and let's just face it, downright boring. If we get together and the Word of God being preached and the songs that you sing and the words of encouragement put you to sleep, there's something dreadfully wrong. Dreadfully wrong. Jesus came into a world, he came into a culture where tradition and organized religion were demoralizing people. Jesus came into a world where man-made rules of an oppressive leadership had isolated everybody from God except those who were the self-appointed guardians of truth. Only the rich were righteous, they thought. The sick must have committed some sin. Women are simply property. That is the environment in which Jesus came in the first century. And if you were to ask anybody around there at that time about those things, about the fact that the poor must not be right with God, and the sick must have sinned, and that women were just property to be dealt with like you deal a piece of paper for land. You know what people then would have said? That's just the real world. That's just the world we live in. That's just the way it is. And you know what Jesus did? He came in that. He burst into that scene and said, that's not good enough. And I'm not settling for that. And he broke every cultural and just about their religious norm that there was. And he elevated women to where they should be. And he spent his time with people like people today with AIDS are treated. That's who he stayed with. He said on one occasion to the leaders, to the most religious of his day, the prostitutes and tax collectors are entering the kingdom of heaven before you. Jesus came into this real world and he changed the way we're supposed to see things, the way we're supposed to see people. God wants everyone to seek him, not just the wealthy, not just the healthy, not just men, not just those who proclaim to be leaders. Listen, Jesus came to change the real world into his world. He changed our reality. And what's the lesson we learn? This is my challenge to you. Never accept any less than what Jesus accepted. Raise the bar. Reject status quo. And if tradition kills people's spirit, then throw tradition out the window. And be the unreal church that Jesus built. Let's pray. God, that's what we want. Whether it's folks who are here all the time and part of this family, or just those maybe who are visiting or passing through, that's what we want. We want to be part of what you authentically built here. Churches without walls, eyes that see without prejudice. God, you know how difficult that is. And no matter what part of the country we live in, there's prejudice of all kinds all around us. Racial, economic, political. I mean, there's every kind. People that don't look like us and talk like us and act like and smell like us. God, those are people that we tend to stand aloof from and not want to be a part of. And yet even if that is what it is like today in church, that's not the real church. And we have to constantly guard against that and turn back to you and ask you to strip down those things. And if we need to be disciplined, if we need to be reprimanded for prejudices and short-sightedness, then I ask you to do that. I ask you to do it to me. God, thank you for the grace that you give, even when we build those walls, even when we treat other people as though they're different and stand apart from you. And I pray, God, that grace that you pour out, that Nicole sang about so beautifully earlier, that you would recreate in us the way it's supposed to be. That's what we want. In Jesus' name, amen.